If you're a homeowner and have had the chance to own a property, I'm sure you know what a property tax is, or the fee that you pay to the government or your local municipality. It's really a fee, a tax, an encumbrance to the property that you own. The property tax is usually attached to the property value, and if the value goes up in your property, then the tax also goes up. Besides the fact that it eats away at any appreciation of your property by taxing the appreciated value of your property, I want to give you some of the historical reasons how this property tax developed. The property tax, or the fee that they pay, the rent, aka the property tax that they pay to municipalities, really is a remnant of the feudal society that used to exist in the Roman and then in the English world. Back in those days, when the serfs had no right to own any property or any land, they used to work on a certain land that was owned by the lord, and the right was given from the king to own that land. The whole land was the sovereign ownership of the king, who gave a right to those lords to own part of that land, and those lords were paying some type of fee, or they would go and fight for the king when he needed them, in exchange for being able to possess that property. Now these great lords then would allow some serfs to come and live on that piece of land and to work on that piece of land for their subsistence. So whatever they made out of that land went totally to the lord. They could only use some food for their own basic subsistence. The cities and towns started growing in Middle Ages. We ended up having a lot of mercantile trade, a lot of manufacturing. We started having growth in the cities, which they used to call burgs. These burghers, or the manufacturers, the tradespeople, started to have animosity against the lords who were trying to charge them rents for being on these types of lands. So there started being a lot of wars in between the lords and the serfs, and the powers of the king was also being diminished, because the power of the lords was huge in Middle Ages. The kings in Middle Ages in England and in France as well, they devised a plan in order to diminish the power of the lords. They gave more power to the serfs. The way they gave power is they allowed some of these merchants who were now living in small towns all together, they allowed them to form armies so they could fight against the lords. As these merchants, tradespeople started being able to raise armies, the king also allowed them to establish a system which we now call municipalities and cities, and they were able to better protect themselves from the lords and their armies. Now, little by little, the lords started losing power as the kings gave more power to these tradesmen that lived in the cities, and slowly but surely the lords realized that they're starting to lose more power and they couldn't keep the serfs on their land, so they started charging them a fee or some type of rent. So a lot of these serfs that were now being freed from serfdom and from bondage and from attachment to the lord's land, they were now able to work on these lands for a fee or a rent that the lord started charging them. From the fact that the king started giving more power to the serfs and the tradesmen and the people that were living in the cities, a lot of freedom started being given to the serfs that before had no freedom, basically because they were attached to a certain land. They were called bonded serfs, In reality, they couldn't leave this land, and if the lord sold the land, they were sold with the land to another lord. But now, because of the animosity in between the king and the lords, these serfs, out of I would say sheer luck, ended up basically gaining freedom. Our ancestors have basically gained freedom from serfdom due to the sheer lack, due to the fact that the kings and the lords had animosity and they were fighting amongst each other for power, who can dominate one another. As the serfs started gaining more freedom, the lords realized that in order to be able to have some of these serfs work on their land and to have profit out of serfdom, now instead of paying for their subsistence, they started charging the serfs rent. And in return, the serfs gained some freedom and eventually gained almost total freedom from serfdom. And now they were called what we can call today freemen, that were working only, they were renting only the land, and they were now not in bondage. They were not in slavery to the lord. Now this is where property taxes and the idea of a property tax arises. Now the rent was now payable to the lord, but eventually, as more serfs became freemen, they were able to own land. And now, instead of paying rent to the lords, they had to pay rent to the king and eventually to the king's corporations, which were the cities and the local municipalities. And this is how property taxes really evolved, from the fact that before there used to be just simple rent that serfs had to pay to their lords because they didn't own the property, and eventually it translated into property taxes to the kings and then eventually to the government of to the government of the local country or jurisdiction that some person resided. So we can see how property taxes developed from feudal system. Now the reason they used to have to pay back in the feudal times rent to the lord is because the serfs didn't own the land. But if today we still have to pay property taxes on a piece of real estate that you own, that means you still don't own that piece of real estate. And in reality, that piece of real estate is still owned by some type of sovereign authority. We know in English Commonwealth, that sovereign authority is the king or the queen. And they own, that king or queen owns all the land, which is called royal realty. And we pay taxes, property taxes, to that king or monarch or queen to be able to reside on a piece of land. In all reality, the only thing has changed is that the lords that used to be very powerful in Middle Ages have been defeated almost, or someone could argue no, they haven't. Now they own the banks. But in reality, now we still pay the regular serf, which became somewhat free and is not in as much bondage as before. Now most free people are debt slaves or in debt bondage. But in any case, now that rent still exists, and it's now payable to the monarch. Let's say in the English world, it's the king or the queen that owns all the land, which is called, with the royal assent, we get a chance to own a piece of property, but we still have to pay rent to the owner of that property, which is really not us, but the king or the queen of the land. So this is how property taxes are really a remnant of the feudal system. And if we want to really own a piece of property, no higher authority can have a tax on that ownership if we truly own that piece of property. So the deduction that I make and the conclusion for this is that we still are not real owners of our property. If we have to pay tax to somebody else, if we have to pay rent on a piece of land that you supposedly own, then it's not really yours if you have to pay rent for it. And a property tax is rent. The fact that we have been told that you own land is pure ridiculous lie. And this is what's happening now. Is we live through times where we're fed a whole bunch of lies with different words, let's say property tax, but we're not really examining the depth. We don't really understand why we're paying property taxes. And they will tell you you're paying for the services that you're being provided. That's an utter lie, because I guarantee you, if you go look at most municipalities, most cities and jurisdictions, a lot of that property tax is going to the bureaucracy, which really doesn't need to be there. There's no reason for that bureaucracy to exist. So we're paying taxes for bureaucracy to exist, and these property taxes are illegal to have it on any property all across Canada. So this is the reason why our rights as property owners are being violated with property taxes, as they're remnants of a feudal regime, which one would think we don't live in anymore, but in all reality, that feudal society and that feudal regime is still here, and it tends to morph into different forms, but it still exists in one shape or another. And for us to really gain our freedom and really become free, this is a realization that we have to make and spread this information to a lot of our fellow serfs that still are out there, that think they're free, but you're really not. And property tax is one way that the elites get to our freedom. Thanks for watching.